Welcome to Spicy Toast Gaming and our updated Teemo guide for Path of Champions. If you enjoy the video, like and subscribe, and let's get into it. First, we're going to start off with a brief overview of the champion, discussing their general playstyle so you have a better understanding of the champion, and if you want to invest your time and resources into them. First up, we have Puff Caps, the main mechanic of Teemo and his deck. Puff Caps are traps you place on the enemy cards in their deck. When they draw a card with Puff Caps on it, they take Nexus damage equal to the amount of Puff Caps drawn. Next up, we have 1 mana champion. Teemo only costs 1 mana, so you can play him at the very start of every game. This gives your champion a massive amount of utility and can enable many relic builds that just don't work on more expensive champions. Up next, we have level scaling. Unlike most other champions, Teemo actually scales more from his champion level than his star powers. Even a 0-star Teemo can be quite strong if you take the time to level him up. Next up, we have ramp early, aggro late. Teemo has 2 drastically different playstyles depending on his level and star powers. When you're first playing Teemo, he'll have a slower ramp playstyle and will often be much more defensive. When you're getting closer to maxing Teemo out, he becomes an early game monster, able to defeat any opponent in just a few turns. I believe Teemo has the most drastic change in playstyle in the entire game. Last up, we have RNG Reliant. When you place Puff Caps on the enemy cards, you do it randomly. So the enemy might draw a card with no Puff Caps on it, despite his deck being full of them, or they might draw a card loaded with Puff Caps, despite there not being that many in their deck. It really is random, so you must be prepared for that before playing Teemo. Alright, that's it for the overview. Let's hop in game to better explain some of the points we touched on here. In game now, taking a look at Teemo, we have him at level 30 and 3 stars. You see he's a 1-cost champion with Elusive, and he's a 1/1. He has Nexus Strike, plant 5 Poison Puff Caps on random cards in the enemy deck, and his level up is you've planted 15 Poison Puff Caps. Once he levels up, he goes to a 2/2, and now his Nexus Strike, instead of planting 5 Puff Caps, now doubles the amount of Puff Caps in the enemy deck. Being able to get consistent Nexus Strike with Teemo once he levels up will exponentially increase the amount of Puff Caps you have planted and will quickly end you the game. His champion spell is the Mushroom Cloud, so 1-cost burst, plant 5 Poison Puff Caps on random cards in the enemy deck. Taking a look at the star powers, your 3-star, when allies attack, plant 10 Poison Puff Caps on random cards in the enemy deck. The 1-star version of this is just plant 5 Poison Puff Caps. Overall, a decent star power, really incentivizing you to attack as much as you can. This also has a great effect of it'll immediately level up Teemo. So you see Teemo, Nexus Strike, plant 5 Puff Caps, and his level up is you've planted 15. So if you play Teemo round 1 and immediately attack, he's going to plant 5, your star power can plant 10, so you'll get to that 15 and immediately level him up on your first attack, making it so that all your next attacks will be able to double the Puff Caps in their deck, really helping you end the game a lot faster. Next up for your 2-star, we have Strike Swiftly, +1 starting mana. When the opponent draws a card with 1 or more Poison Puff Caps on it, create a fleeting Poison Dart in hand. It is burst speed. So Poison Dart, we've already seen this. So you're creating a fleeting card that is deal 1 to anything and plant 3 Poison Puff Caps on it. That's also burst speed, so you can immediately play it and the enemy can't respond fast enough. Great way to just try to do a little bit more damage to the Nexus or try to finish off a target. And then also putting more Puff Caps on the enemy deck. This does still cost that 1 mana baseline, so it will cost to play it unless you get some powers in-game to reduce that down. It is a helpful star power. Quite often there's going to be times where the enemy Nexus is just like 1 away from dying, so really helping you finish off the Nexus or some units can be quite helpful, but most of your power is coming from your other star power. Taking a look at his starting decks, you see we have Teemo at level 1, then we have the Concologist, 2-cost 2/1 with that Philosopher's Stone, so when you play it you draw a card, and then play Manifest a spell from your regions that cost 3 or less. This is just an all-around fine card, not amazing, but it is a decent 2-drop that will give you a decent draw, and also help you manifest a spell that can help you. Next we have the Puff Cap Pup also a 2 cost. This one will help you out quite a lot. So you see it has the studded leather, so it's a 3/3 with that quick attack and strike. Plant 3 poison puff caps on random cards on the enemy deck. Also, while it's not showing it here, if we take a look at the champion levels, he also gets special delivery, so attack, plant 5 poison puff caps on random cards in the enemy deck. For some reason, the starting deck can only show 1 upgrade, and so when you get multiples from the starting deck, or from the champion levels, they don't show up here. Next we have Stress Defense with that mana potion, so it goes down to a 2 cost, and it's burst. Set a unit stats to 1/6 this round. This is great both defensively or offensively. You can either use it to save one of your own units by buffing up their health, or you can use it to reduce down an enemy that's trying to destroy your Nexus or card by reducing their attack down to 1. So there's a lot of different ways you can use this card, and it's just a good all-around combat trick. Also, if we take a look at the champion levels, this is another card that has a second upgrade. So the Stress Defense has Hand Sensor, grant the top ally in your deck 1/1. Again, since it has 2 upgrades, it can only show 1 here. Next up we have the Puff Cap Peddler, so 3 cost, 4/6 with that Savage Shield. When you play a spell, plant 3 poison puff caps on random cards on the enemy deck. So normally you want to be able to play this unit and then try to play as many spells as you can. And then while he's on the board, every time you play a spell, he's just putting more puff caps in the enemy deck. Very solid card. This one will really help you in the early game. Next up, we have Sump Fumes, a 3 cost fast. Deal 2 to a unit. If you've added 2 or more cards to your hand this round, deal 3 to it instead. And you get that Charging Sigil, just increasing both of these damage by 2. Very solid removal card. It's very good on its base form because it's going to do 4 damage, but if you also happen to have drawn extra cards, you'll be able to boost that damage up by 1, which can be helpful in some situations. Next up we have Chump Wump, so 4 cost 5/5 with that Dragon Tooth, so Fury. When I'm summoned, create 2 Mushroom Clouds in hand. So you see here, 1 cost, plant 5 poison puff caps on random cards in the enemy deck. Just overall a solid unit that also helps you put more puff caps in the enemy deck. Next up we have the Lecturing Yordle, so 4 cost, 3/5, attack, create a fleeting Poison Dart in hand. Also has that challenger. And Poison Dart, so 1 cost slow, deal 1 to anything, so including the enemy Nexus, and plant 3 poison puff caps on random cards in the enemy deck. Now while this card is fine, it's normally the card I choose to cut just because it's fairly expensive and it's also fairly weak for the amount of mana you have to spend to play it. So if you're looking for a card to cut, this is normally my go-to. Next up, we have the Ava Achiever. So it goes down to a ancient coin, or goes down to a 5 cost because of that ancient coin, which is quite helpful. And it's a 4/4, but the main reason you're playing this card is its effect. When I'm summoned or round end, plant 3 poison puff caps on random cards in the enemy deck. Traps on enemy cards are doubled when activated. So as long as this card is on the board, every time the enemy activates one of your traps, this card doubles it. So this is a great finisher, especially when you're first playing Teemo and you're at those early levels. This is normally the card that's going to finish the game. You're spending the first couple rounds putting as many puff caps as you can. You play this card for 5 cost, and then normally the next 1 or 2 times that they play puff caps, this card is able to double them and end the game for you. Really great card. You're really going to rely on this card at your early levels when Teemo has a much slower game plan. Alright, next up we have Relic. Teemo scales incredibly well with Relics. This is one of the best builds possible for Teemo. Gale Force seems like it was tailor-made for Teemo. He uses it better than pretty much anyone else. Both effects, the Scout and Round End Recall Me, work great. So the Scout letting Teemo attack twice, letting him hit the Nexus twice, either planting the puff caps or doubling the puff caps already in there. And then remember from your star powers, every time you attack, your star power activates, planting 5 to 10 puff caps on the enemy deck. So getting those extra attacks from Scout really helps you out, just increase the number of puff caps. Gatebreaker also works incredibly well. So when I'm summoned, I strike the enemy Nexus. That obviously counts as a Nexus strike, again allowing Teemo to either plant puff caps or double the puff caps. The combo of these two together can be incredible. So you can play Teemo round 1, he immediately strikes the Nexus, planting 5 puff caps. Then when you attack, his star powers will go off. If you have him at 3 stars, that's going to immediately plant 10 more before he hits the Nexus again. Since your star powers are planting 10, and then he planted 5 when you played him from the Gatebreaker, he is then leveling up because you've planted 15. So then when he hits the Nexus in that very first attack, he's then going to double the puff caps. So now suddenly in your very first attack, Teemo's already leveled, the enemy already has 30 puff caps in their entire deck. And with that scout, he can attack a second time, doubling it again. Now, if you have the bounty hunters, technically another gatebreaker might be better just to get more Nexus strikes in. But with the bounty hunter, increasing Teemo's stats is very beneficial. He's going to be hitting the Nexus a lot. So even though he's just at a 1-1, with all the Nexus strikes he's doing, he's actually going to be chunking down the enemy Nexus quite hard. Any amount you can increase that with bounty hunters is amazing. If you're playing with a maxed out Teemo, normally Teemo himself hitting the Nexus is actually going to be doing more damage than the actual puff caps themselves, which is pretty crazy. The Gale Force, the round end Recall Me, that is great because then you can play Teemo again for the next round. He'll get the Gatebreaker to go off again, hitting the enemy Nexus. So even if you don't have the attack token, just playing Teemo for that one cost to get that Nexus strike off to double their puff caps is definitely worth it and will really help you out. Now, while this build is amazing and I highly recommend you playing it if you have these relics, there are definitely many other relics that Teemo can still use. For common relics, having Banshee's Veil to give your Teemo some protection can be quite nice. Rage Blade, if you're not going to recall Teemo, every time he attacks, letting him grow his stats by 1-1. Really helpful, especially when he just starts at a 1-1. Chameleon's Necklace can be quite nice. You're going to want to play Teemo the very first round, so making sure you draw him at the start of the game can really help you out. And then any extra Teemos, the champion spell is still pretty useful, so that's not bad. For some rare relics, if you're not going for Gale Force, the Grand General's counter plan can help you out. So round start, create a fleeting copy of me in hand. So essentially you're going to be creating a Mushroom Cloud. This also works as a safety net because if Teemo dies, you're creating that fleeting copy of him in hand, so you can then play another 1-cost Teemo. So it kind of works as a safety net and extra protection, which can be quite nice, especially since Teemo is normally pretty squishy. Guardian Angel, also not bad. You can still pair this with the Curator's Gatebreaker. That way, even if the enemy does kill your Teemo, he'll then be able to be revived and hit the Gatebreaker again. You can also trigger this with letting your Teemo block the enemies to manually trigger this as well, which can be helpful. Green Glade Shadeleaf can be fun since you're going to let your Teemo sit on the board hopefully the whole game. And you can just keep granting your entire board elusive throughout the entire game. Corrupted Star Fragment, support, kill my supported ally, grant me its stats and keywords. Again, since Teemo is just level 1, being able to scale him up throughout the entire game can be quite strong, especially with starting out with elusive. Archangel Staff, round start, refill your spell mana. Great usefulness for Teemo because, again, he's going to be on your board almost the entire game, so you're always going to get this activated essentially every round but the first one, which can really help you out, especially with your 2-star, since that will be creating a 1-cost spell most rounds, so making sure you always have the mana to play that can be quite nice. And Guardian Orb actually works quite well for Teemo as well. When I'm summoned, grant epic items to 3 random cards in your deck. So most games you will probably be playing multiple Teemos since they might die, or if you're playing Gale Force, it's going to be recalled every round. So having a Guardian Orb so that every time you play Teemo, this is activating, buffing up random cards in your deck can be quite fun, especially with Teemo. You do have that RNG factor already, so just further doubling down, rolling the dice on whether or not you're going to get a fun item from Guardian's Orb can be pretty fun for some people. Alright, that's it for the relics I wanted to highlight. There's still plenty of other relic builds you can do for Teemo. Those are just some of the ones I think work the best. Let's go take a look at what powers and support champions you might want to look for when playing Teemo. Alright, taking a look at powers now. Up first, we have Stabilize. When you summon a champion, summon an exact ephemeral copy of it. This works out great for Teemo because normally this is going to mean an extra Nexus strike, which can be quite good. And if you're using a Gatebreaker, this can immediately trigger. This also pairs exceptionally well if you're using Gale Force, since you're going to be playing him and summoning him every round, so Stabilize is going to be going off every round. But even without Gale Force, it's still a great option to pick up. Fixer Upper, round start, give your weakest ally 3/3 this round. If you're not going for Gale Force, your weakest ally will normally be Teemo, so buffing him up by 3/3 every round can work out quite well, both to give your Teemo a bit more survivability, but also make all those Nexus strikes hit even harder. Next up, we have Domination Round Start Rally. You want to be able to attack every single round, both to trigger your star powers, but then also for Teemo to be able to double the puff caps. This really works out quite well for you. Next up, we have some defensive options. These will really help you, especially if you're just starting to play Teemo. So we have Hold Them Off, Round Start, Frostbite the strongest enemy. Very simple. Enfeebling Strike, generally the best defensive power in the game. So when you damage an enemy, reduce its power by the damage dealt. So whenever you're attacking a unit or just blocking or hitting an enemy unit with a spell, all of that damage is going to be reducing down their power permanently. So this also adds a good amount of utility to all of your removal spells so that you can use them on an enemy, and even if it doesn't kill them, normally it will reduce down their power enough that they're no longer a threat. Great option if you see it. Then last up, we have Hold It. round start, stun the strongest enemy. Again, pretty straightforward, but definitely will help you out in many situations. So last up, we have some spell-based powers. So first up here on the left, we have Wild Inspiration. Your created cards cost 1 less. With Teemo, your second star power is normally going to be creating a 1-cost spell every single round. So making sure you can play that for free, very nice. Sorcery round start, refill your spell mana. Very simple, just making sure you always have mana to play whatever spells you have. And then Spell Slinger, your spells cost 1 less. For Teemo, most of your spells only cost 1 mana, so this is making most of your spells cost nothing, which is incredibly powerful. Any of these are a great pickup for Teemo. Definitely try them out if you see them in game. Now this is just a fairly small selection of the powers. Teemo is actually able to benefit from a massive amount of powers in the game, so definitely experiment. There's plenty of amazing powers that I didn't mention here, especially a lot of epic ones, but I normally try to not put too many epics in these guides since people will see them less. But yeah, if you're playing Teemo, definitely experiment. There's plenty of amazing powers out there in the game for you. On to support champions. As always, this isn't an exhaustive list, just some things to look for when you're picking a support champion. Up first, we have extra attacks. So Scout, Rally, free attacks, any of those work really well for Teemo, since every time you attack, you're able to plant 10 puff caps on the enemy deck, which is quite powerful. Next up, we have defensive. So especially when you're first playing Teemo and you're at those lower levels or you don't have all your star powers, having some defensive champions that can help you out is very beneficial. So for extra attacks, we have Lucian. I feel like I use him for just about every guide. He just fits so many roles. When Lucian levels up, he's able to trigger a rally for you, just giving you a extra attack, which is quite helpful. He's also a 1-cost champion, so you can get him on the board very easily. And then for defensive, we have Yasuo. He has a lot of stuns in his kit, so being able to stun some enemy units really helps your survivability, and he's just in general a great defensive champion. That is it though for the support champions and this guide. I hope it helped you out. If it did, definitely like and subscribe, and I hope you have a great day.